In the silver anniversary Prezi, I proposed a model for teaching science based on the last 25 years of my career as a science teacher and a science coach. In the center of the model is the question, how do students come to understand science? The model linked inquiry-based science teaching with the conceptual change model for teaching science. This video explores more on teaching for conceptual change. In the background of the model, keep in mind that there's inquiry, where students are collecting evidence and making sense of it. Also, there's a focus on science literacy and student understanding, not memorizing facts. There's also a focus in the background on assessing student understanding, and a big part of that is all that we know about student misconceptions. So, if students have misconceptions, and if we understand what they are, what do we do about them as science teachers? That's what conceptual change teaching is all about. Here's the question this video focuses on. So how do you guide students to change their understanding of science, especially if you know that their misconceptions are prevalent and pervasive and really resistant to traditional instruction? Science educators like myself have been doing research on what it looks like to teach for conceptual change, so students really change their conceptual understandings. And Peter Hewson is one of the lead researchers on that. You can find an article written by him that overviews teaching for conceptual change by just clicking on this link here in the Prezi, and it'll pop open a window. There you go, just like that. And you can read the whole article there. If you want to dig deeper into conceptual change. As I've understood conceptual change, I've developed discourse standards for large group teaching. To me, the best conceptual change happens in large group. Yes, I can guide students to change their understanding one-on-one, but boy, that takes a lot of time when you have 125 to 150 students. I can also do it small group, but the real bang for my buck in teaching happens when I guide kids to change their ideas through large group discourse. 3 standards that I propose for what good quality large group discourse looks like when the teacher is orchestrating that discourse for conceptual change. First, the teacher continually engages the thinking of all students. There are a lot of ways to do that, and the bullets under here list some ways to do it. But if you're going to have good quality large group discussion, all students have to be engaged. A key thing that I use is what my method students have termed the magic clipboard, where I'm always checking and assessing, and my students see the clipboard in my hand, and they know that I'm going to call on them by name. I'm going to record whether they're participating. I'm holding them accountable for being involved in the discussion of the evidence. Second standard for large group discourse is that the teacher continually assesses students' revealed understanding against the targeted conceptual framework, or at that end, think the targeted conceptual understanding. So this is the idea of, as students reveal their understanding, that could be misconceptions, that could be a partial understanding like we're going to talk about later. As they reveal those understandings, I'm always thinking about what they're saying about how they understand against, for me, it's typically the Atlas cluster that I'm focusing on, that conceptual understanding from science literacy that I want them to have. So, and again, the bullets give you some ideas of how I do that. But one thing that I do is I give myself time when a student gives an idea to just think about it. And there may be 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds of wait time too, as Mary Bud Rowe described it, as I'm thinking about what the student said and how I'm going to respond, and the next question I might ask, or the next piece of evidence I might draw the class's attention to, especially something that causes them to have to think differently about their understanding because it conflicts with their understanding. The third standard is guiding students to reconstruct stronger scientific understanding. If a teacher is doing large group discussion well, students can't end the large group conversation without having a good understanding of science. It's a myth of inquiry that students retain bad ideas. If inquiry is working well, students should get to strong understanding. They should actually their ideas should match accepted science. And again, partial understanding, as we're going to talk about in a second, is there, especially toward the beginning of the unit. As I'm listening to their understandings, it may not be complete and solid yet, but they should be moving toward better understandings. 3 standards for large group discourse. Now, let's talk about a little bit of the research behind those and how those can be practical in the classroom. Approximate fit is something that really influenced me in my own teaching and in developing this model. It's the idea of the partial understanding that I mentioned before. So often in traditional science teaching, we think that at the end of one lesson, every kid should have nailed down all of the science ideas. Well, that just doesn't happen. And I learned this from some research that Ken Appleton did out of Australia. Here's the reference if you'd like to look that up in the Journal of Research in Science Teaching. And based on research, he developed this model. And look at how difficult it is for kids to get from their existing ideas to the exit in which they have a better understanding. Look at that maze that kids have to take themselves through. They have a new encounter through evidence. They think about it. They're trying to get a best fit idea and processing the information. Oh, wow. Some of the kids in the class, or many of them, or maybe most of them, may have an incomplete fit between what they understood and what they saw, and they get cognitive conflict. And so then they may go back and seek more information, which puts them back into this loop. But there are other ways out. They could see what happened before in the new encounter and process it as it fits what they already knew, and they never change their ideas. They stick with their existing idea, even if it's wrong. What we hope happens is, as they process good inquiry, good scientific evidence, they change their understanding to an approximate fit to the idea that the teacher is targeting. But if you have the time, if you can find this article, you'll find that's really difficult to do. Not impossible, but the idea of approximate fit is the idea that through a lesson after lesson, students are changing their understanding a little bit more, approximating more and more the scientific understanding we're targeting. For me, that's that big atlas cluster. One more big idea from the research, and it's the idea of status change. Michael Beath got me onto this idea in this article, if you want to chase the reference. He did a deep study of 4th and 5th grade students, and he found out how they came to make sense of the inquiries that they were doing. And his 2 things that he found out was new ideas have to be both plausible and intelligible. So think about, as you're teaching for conceptual change, new scientific ideas have to be plausible to the kids, and they have to be intelligible. The kids have to be able to make sense of just what the idea is. And they also have to, it also has to have, not just they understand it, but it fits with the evidence and fits with the world, their world. In Michael Beath's article, if you get a chance to get your hands on it, he actually does transcripts like this of discussions between kids in the classroom where he was studying, where you can actually see what the conversation is like when kids are wrestling with an idea to see if it's plausible and intelligible. And the big thing I pulled out of all of this was the idea of status change. So you're having a large group conversation with kids, 2 or 3 ideas in the room are in the room of the interpretation of evidence. A group of kids has a misconception You've got to guide them to change the status of that idea. Notice I didn't say you change the status. They have to change the status. They have to decide from this idea of status change that their idea doesn't make as much sense. They have to lower its status and at the same time raise the status of the new idea to the point where they're ready to abandon the old idea. Well, you may know this from working with kids. Kids do that better with each other than we do as teachers. Kids can argue each other into status change better, typically, than we do as teachers. Those are the main ideas of teaching for understanding. A couple of tips. Science notebooks are great for the last part of conceptual change, which is metacognition. And if you notice in red, it says right here, help me metacognate. Made up the word, sure. But if kids don't go through metacognition about the new understanding that they've developed through large group discourse, they'll typically lose it. And if you're familiar with the hands-on kit-based science like FOSS and STC, conceptual storylines running through a unit of inquiry are a great way to help kids develop a good, strong understanding. There's an overview of conceptual change teaching. Remember, I've proposed down here 3 discourse standards for large group discourse. And I've given you 2 key ideas from the research with approximate fit and status change of how the research says that the conceptual change model guides teaching. If you'd like to see that played out in a unit, I applied this whole model of teaching science in a unit of evolution, and you can actually see lesson plans and guidance on how to create large group discourse when teaching evolution. Keep in mind that this video focused on this side of the model. Watch for other videos on inquiry itself. And all of this focuses on how do you get kids to really understand science in ways so that they have strong understandings that they hold on for life, well, for a long, long time, let's hope for life. And one of the key things in here is teachers have to know how to guide kids to change their own understandings of science. And the conceptual change model is one of the best things I know for actually doing that with kids in the classroom in large group discourse. Hope that helps.